Novitiate is a powerful and emotional story about love, faith, and self-discovery. Set in the early 1960s, during a time when big changes were happening in the Catholic Church, the movie follows a young woman named Cathleen Harris. Cathleen joins a convent, hoping to find love and peace through God. But as she goes deeper into this life of strict rules and devotion, she starts to question what love really means and whether she is on the right path. This movie isn't just about religion, it's about people. It's about the need to feel loved, the struggle to understand yourself, and the choices we make when we're searching for meaning. The story focuses on the emotional side of Cathleen's journey, especially when it comes to the close and complicated bond she forms with another novice, Sister Emmanuel. Their relationship brings up feelings Cathleen has never experienced before, making her question everything she thought she knew about love and faith. At the convent, life is tough and demanding. The rules are strict, and the young women training to become nuns are expected to give up everything: their personal desires, their independence, and even parts of their identity. Reverend Mother Marie St. Clair is the head of the convent and enforces these rules harshly. She believes that true devotion requires complete sacrifice, and she's determined to keep things the way they've always been, even as the Catholic Church starts moving toward more modern practices. As Cathleen spends more time in the convent, she begins to feel torn. She wants to be close to God, but she also starts developing feelings for Sister Emmanuel. Feelings that make her question whether giving up love and human connection is really the right path. The tension between her faith and her emotions creates a powerful and heartbreaking conflict. But Novitiate isn't just about Cathleen's struggles. It also tells the story of Reverend Mother, who's fighting her own battles. She spent her entire life following the old ways of the Church, and now those traditions are being challenged. She's afraid that everything she's worked for and all the sacrifices she's made might have been for nothing. What makes this movie so special is how real and human it feels. It captures the quiet moments of doubt, love, and fear with so much honesty. The story isn't loud or dramatic, it's gentle and thoughtful, showing how hard it can be to choose between the life you've been taught to believe in and the life your heart is calling you toward. As we dive into this recap, we'll explore Cathleen's emotional journey and the relationships that shape her. We'll see how her search for God's love leads her to discover a different kind of love, one that's just as real and meaningful. This is a story about faith, love, and the courage it takes to stay true to yourself, even when it means walking away from everything you know. Cathleen's journey into the convent is rooted in her complicated early life, one that's marked by a deep longing for love and meaning. Growing up, Cathleen's world is shaped by a sense of emotional distance, especially from her mother Nora. Nora is a hard woman, both emotionally and practically. She works tirelessly to support her family, but struggles to show the affection and warmth that Cathleen needs. The relationship between mother and daughter is strained, and Cathleen grows up feeling neglected, almost invisible. Her father leaves the family when Cathleen is still a child, which further deepens her sense of abandonment and loss. The absence of a strong father figure and the coldness from her mother leave a void in Cathleen's heart, making her search for love feel more desperate and intense as she grows older. During her childhood, Cathleen is a quiet, introspective girl who often seems lost in thought. She isn't the kind to seek attention or approval from others. Her reserved nature makes her stand out as someone who is searching for something greater. In many ways, it feels like she's trying to find a place where she can belong, a place where she won't feel like an outsider. When she starts attending a Catholic school, Cathleen is exposed to a whole new world, one filled with religious practices, rituals, and perhaps most importantly, the idea of a love that transcends human flaws. The kindness and gentleness of the nuns who teach at the school provide a sharp contrast to the coldness she feels at home. For the first time, Cathleen sees women who have chosen to dedicate their lives to something higher, and she is drawn to this idea. The teachings about God's love begin to resonate deeply with her. To Cathleen, this divine love feels like the answer to the emotional void she's carried throughout her childhood. Unlike the complicated and often painful relationships she's known with her mother and father, the idea of God's love feels pure and unconditional. It's a kind of love that doesn't expect anything in return and doesn't come with the disappointments and misunderstandings of the world around her. In the convent's atmosphere, Cathleen feels a sense of peace and belonging that she's never experienced before. She starts to believe that by giving herself entirely to God, she will find the love and acceptance she has always craved. However, her desire for this love isn't purely spiritual. Cathleen's need to feel valued and loved also stems from a deep sense of loneliness. She's not just searching for faith, she's looking for a way to fill the emptiness inside her. This becomes clearer when Cathleen's mother reacts negatively to her daughter's interest in religion. Nora doesn't understand Cathleen's need for God or for spiritual connection, and her lack of support only deepens Cathleen's feelings of isolation. But instead of turning away from the church, Cathleen pushes forward, convinced that her path lies in the convent. She believes that by dedicating her life to serving God and the church, she will find not only divine love, but also a sense of purpose and meaning that's been missing from her life. Her decision to join the convent is a reflection of Cathleen's desperate search for love, not just from God, but from the world around her. She hopes that by committing herself to this new life, she will finally find the acceptance, peace, and connection she's always longed for. But as the story unfolds, we begin to see how this search for love will become far more complicated than Cathleen ever imagined. In her quest for spiritual fulfillment, she is confronted with difficult choices that will challenge everything she thought she knew about love, faith, and herself. When Cathleen enters the convent, it feels like stepping into a completely different world. Everything about it is quiet, controlled, and serious. The outside world, with all its noise and distractions, fades away. In its place is a life of strict rules, daily prayers, and a deep focus on discipline and devotion. For Cathleen, this is exactly what she thought she wanted, a chance to dedicate herself fully to God and finally find the love and peace she's been searching for. But the reality of life in the convent turns out to be much harder than she expected. One of the first things Cathleen and the other novices learn is that the convent demands total obedience. They wake up before dawn, spend hours in prayer, and follow a strict schedule with almost no room for personal freedom. The rules are clear. No speaking unless given permission, no personal attachments, and no questioning authority. Every part of their day is designed to teach sacrifice. The idea that to truly love God, they must give up everything else, including their own desires, individuality, and even their sense of self. Reverend Mother Marie St. Clair is the one who enforces these rules, and she does so with an iron grip. She believes that true devotion requires suffering, and she pushes the novices to their limits. Her methods are harsh and sometimes even cruel. She uses fear and punishment to keep them in line, making sure they understand that this life demands total surrender. Under her watchful eye, the convent becomes a place of constant pressure, where the slightest mistake can lead to humiliation and harsh discipline. For Cathleen, this environment is both comforting and terrifying. On one hand, the structure gives her a sense of purpose, a clear path to follow in her search for divine love. But on the other hand, the isolation starts to take its toll. Cut off from her family, friends, and the outside world, she begins to feel incredibly alone. The silence, meant to help them focus on their faith, often feels heavy and suffocating. There's no space for warmth or human connection, and the more time Cathleen spends there, the more she starts to feel the weight of that emptiness. Despite the harshness, Cathleen remains determined. She wants to prove her devotion, not just to Reverend Mother and the other nuns, but to herself. She believes that if she can endure the sacrifices and stay strong, she'll find the love and acceptance she's been craving. But as time goes on, the line between faith and fear starts to blur. The more she gives up of herself, the more she begins to wonder if this is really the path to peace or if she's simply losing who she is. This period in the convent shapes Cathleen in ways she never expected. The discipline and isolation force her to confront her doubts and desires, setting the stage for the emotional struggles she'll face as she continues her journey toward understanding love, faith, and herself. Life in the convent is cold and demanding, but in that harsh environment, the novices find small moments of comfort in each other. The strict rules keep them silent most of the time, but there's an unspoken bond growing between them, a quiet understanding that they're all going through the same struggle. For many of these young women, this is their first time being away from their families, and the loneliness can feel overwhelming. In a place where they're expected to give up everything, the only thing they have left is each other. Cathleen, who's always been a bit of an outsider, slowly starts to find a sense of belonging among the other novices. Despite the silence and the pressure to remain focused on their faith, there are moments when their shared experience brings them closer. A glance, a small smile, or a whispered word of encouragement becomes a lifeline. These moments of connection are rare, but powerful reminder that even in their isolation, they're not completely alone. One of the most important relationships Cathleen forms is with Sister Emmanuel. Sister Emmanuel is gentle and kind, and there's a warmth to her that stands out in the cold, disciplined world of the convent. She notices Cathleen's quiet strength and the struggles she tries to hide, and over time, a quiet closeness begins to grow between them. In a place where they're told to suppress their emotions and avoid personal attachments, their connection feels both comforting and dangerous. Their friendship deepens in stolen moments, a brief conversation, a comforting touch, a shared understanding. It's not just about attraction, it's about feeling seen and understood. For Cathleen, who spent so much of her life feeling unloved and overlooked, Sister Emmanuel's kindness feels like a light in the darkness. Through her, Cathleen starts to experience a different kind of love, one that's gentle, supportive, and human. But in the convent, even these small connections come with risk. Reverend Mother makes it clear that personal attachments are a distraction from their devotion to God. The young women are taught that true love can only be found through sacrifice and discipline, and any feelings that pull them toward each other are seen as weakness. Despite the fear and the rules, Cathleen can't help but be drawn to the comfort she finds in Sister Emmanuel's presence. Their bond becomes a quiet rebellion, a reminder that even in a place built on sacrifice, the need for human connection is impossible to ignore. Through this relationship, Cathleen begins to realize that love doesn't have to be a choice between God and people, that maybe there's room for both. This realization sets the stage for the emotional and spiritual conflict that will shape the rest of her journey. Reverend Mother Marie St. Clarice, one of the most powerful and intimidating figures in the convent. From the moment we meet her, it's clear she believes in strict discipline and complete devotion to God. She runs the convent with an iron will, convinced that suffering and sacrifice are the only true paths to faith. But as the story unfolds, we start to see that beneath her harsh exterior is a woman deeply afraid, scared of change, of losing control, and of a world that's moving forward without her. The 1960s bring major shifts to the Catholic Church, especially with the introduction of Vatican II, reforms meant to modernize the church and make it more open and accessible. For Reverend Mother, these changes feel like a threat to everything she's dedicated her life to. She sees the old ways, strict rules, silence, and self-denial as essential to true faith. Letting go of these traditions feels like letting go of God's will, and the idea terrifies her. As the reforms start creeping into the convent, Reverend Mother becomes more rigid and desperate to maintain order. She pushes the novices even harder, believing that their obedience is the only way to preserve the sanctity of their faith. Her punishments become harsher and her words more severe. But underneath that severity is fear. Fear that the life she's devoted herself to is slipping away, that the church she loves is changing into something she no longer recognizes. This fear creates a deep loneliness in Reverend Mother. Despite her position of authority, she's isolated, clinging to traditions that fewer and fewer people seem to believe in. While the novices struggle with their own doubts and desires, Reverend Mother fights a different battle against time and progress. She spent her entire life teaching that love requires sacrifice, and now she's being asked to question that belief. It shakes her to the core. One of the most powerful moments in the film comes when we see Reverend Mother's vulnerability. In the privacy of her own space, away from the eyes of the novices, her mask of control slips. She's no longer the commanding figure everyone fears. She's a woman who's afraid of losing her purpose. This glimpse of her humanity makes it clear that her harshness isn't just about power, it's about fear. She truly believes she's protecting the church and these young women from a world that doesn't understand faith the way she does. Reverend Mother's crisis mirrors the struggles happening inside the convent. Just as the novices wrestle with their own desires and doubts, she's battling the fear that everything she's built is crumbling. Her resistance to change becomes one of the biggest obstacles Cathleen and the other novices face, forcing them to choose between their own search for love and faith and the rigid expectations of the woman who leads them. As Cathleen spends more time in the convent, the life she thought would bring her peace and love starts to feel heavier and more confusing. What began as a search for divine love, a love she believed would fill the emptiness she's felt her whole life, slowly turns into a struggle between faith and desire, obedience and self-discovery. The discipline and isolation, which once felt like a path to spiritual fulfillment, now feel like a cage. And as that cage tightens around her, Cathleen begins to question everything she thought she knew about love, God, and herself. At first, Cathleen does everything she can to follow the rules and prove her devotion. She wakes before dawn, prays for hours, and accepts the harsh punishments without complaint. She believes that through suffering, she'll grow closer to God. The more she denies herself, the more worthy she'll become of His love. But as time passes, that love starts to feel distant. The silence that's supposed to bring clarity only brings loneliness. The strictness that's meant to teach discipline starts to feel like control. Instead of feeling closer to God, Cathleen begins to feel lost. Her growing friendship with Sister Emmanuel becomes one of the few sources of comfort in this harsh environment. In a place where warmth and affection are seen as distractions, their quiet bond feels both necessary and dangerous. Sister Emmanuel's kindness gives Cathleen a sense of being seen and cared for, something she's been missing her entire life. But with that comfort comes confusion. The more drawn she feels to Sister Emmanuel, the more she questions whether the love she's been searching for is spiritual or human. This confusion grows into a deeper crisis of faith. Cathleen starts wondering if the life she's chosen, a life of sacrifice and isolation, is really the right path for her. She wants to dedicate herself to God, but the convent's version of devotion asks her to give up too much. Her individuality, her emotions, and her need for connection. The love she's been taught to seek is supposed to be pure and divine, But the human love she's beginning to feel brings its own kind of peace and warmth. The weight of this decision becomes heavier as the convent itself starts to change. With the reforms of Vatican II looming, the strict traditions Reverend Mother has fought so hard to protect are beginning to crumble. The rules are being questioned, the silence is breaking, and the idea of what it means to serve God is shifting. But instead of bringing relief, this change only adds to the confusion. If the Church itself can evolve, what does that mean for the sacrifices Cathleen and the other novices have made? Was all their suffering necessary, or was it just fear disguised as devotion? Cathleen's relationship with Sister Emmanuel becomes a symbol of this internal battle. The warmth and understanding she finds in Sister Emmanuel's presence offer a kind of love she's never experienced before. It's gentle and comforting, a stark contrast to the cold, demanding faith the convent preaches. But the more she leans into that connection, the more guilt she feels. Every tender moment feels like a betrayal of the vows she's preparing to take. And yet, those moments are also the only times Cathleen truly feels at peace. Reverend Mother's increasing desperation only makes things harder. As she tightens her grip on the convent's old ways, her punishments become harsher and her fear of change turns into cruelty. Cathleen becomes a target of that fear, a symbol of the doubt Reverend Mother refuses to acknowledge in herself. The more Cathleen questions the life she's chosen, the more Reverend Mother pushes back, determined to break her spirit in the name of preserving faith. In the end, the choice Cathleen faces isn't just about faith or love, it's about survival. Staying in the convent means continuing to suppress her desires, her doubts, and her sense of self. Leaving means stepping into an unknown world without the safety of the structure she's relied on. But as the pressure builds and the walls of the convent close in, Cathleen begins to realize that true love, whether spiritual or human, can't exist without honesty. And if she wants to find peace, she'll have to stop running from the truth of who she is and what she really wants. When the moment of decision finally comes, it's heartbreaking and freeing all at once. Cathleen's journey has been one of sacrifice, but in choosing her own path, she takes her first real step toward love. Not the distant, unreachable love she was taught to chase, but a love rooted in acceptance, connection, and the courage to be herself. Throughout the movie, what makes Reverend Mother such a complex character is that her fear isn't just about power, it's about identity. For decades, she's defined herself by this life of sacrifice. She's given up everything for the Church: love, comfort, individuality, and even the simple joys of being human. If the Church no longer demands that level of self-denial, what was it all for? What does it say about the life she chose and the pain she endured? These questions breaks her, even as she fights to silence them. When Reverend Mother finally breaks, it's one of the most emotional moments in the film. The woman who seemed so unshakable is revealed to be vulnerable and lost. She's not just mourning the changes in the Church, she's mourning the life she's given up, the choices she made, and the possibility that she might have been wrong. It's a painful realization, and one that leaves her raw and exposed. But in that breakdown, there's also a quiet kind of freedom. Letting go of the old ways forces Reverend Mother to face the truth she's been avoiding, that faith isn't just about suffering, and love isn't just about sacrifice. As much as it hurts, stepping into this new, uncertain world gives her a chance to rediscover the humanity she spent so long trying to suppress. And while she may never fully embrace the change, the breakdown marks the beginning of a different kind of faith. One that rooted not in fear, but in acceptance. After everything Cathleen goes through, her journey has been one of love, but not the kind of love she expected. At first, she thought divine love would fill the emptiness she felt, that giving herself fully to God would bring her peace. But the more she tried to suppress her own desires and needs, the more distant that love became. It wasn't until she allowed herself to feel connected with Sister Emmanuel, to acknowledge her own doubts and longings, that she started to understand what love really meant. Love isn't just about sacrifice, it's about acceptance, warmth, and being truly seen. Cathleen's connection with Sister Emmanuel plays a huge role in this realization. Though their relationship never fully crosses into the physical, the emotional bond they share is undeniable. In a place built on silence and self-denial, their moments of kindness and understanding become a quiet rebellion, a reminder that love doesn't have to be cold or distant to be pure. Sister Emmanuel's gentle presence shows Cathleen that love can be tender and comforting, a source of strength rather than suffering. In the end, Cathleen's new beginning is about courage. Courage to question, to change, and to choose a life that feels true. It's a quiet, powerful kind of bravery, and it leaves us with hope that she'll find the love and peace she's been searching for, not through sacrifice, but through acceptance and authenticity. Finally, Novitiate is a story that goes far beyond religion. It's about faith, not just in God, but in love, in connection, and in ourselves. At its core, this movie is about a young woman's search for something deeper, a love that makes her feel whole, a purpose that gives her life meaning. And while Cathleen starts that search through the strict devotion of the convent, her journey takes her to a place she never expected, one where love and faith look very different from the rules she's been taught to follow. What makes this story so powerful is how deeply human it is. We all know what it feels like to want to belong, to crave love and acceptance. Cathleen's struggle, the battle between what she thinks she should want and what her heart actually needs, is something many of us face in our own way. Her crisis of faith isn't just about religion, it's about identity. It's about figuring out who she is when the life she chose no longer fits, and that's a kind of doubt we can all relate to. The relationships in this movie add so much emotional depth, especially Cathleen's bond with Sister Emmanuel. Their connection is tender and quiet, built on kindness and understanding in a place where warmth is rare. It's through this relationship that Cathleen starts to realize love doesn't have to come from suffering. She learns that real love can be gentle, supportive, and human. And while the movie never pushes their connection into anything physical, the emotional intimacy they share is just as powerful. It's a love that gives Cathleen strength, even as it leaves her more confused than ever. Reverend Mother's journey is just as heartbreaking. Her breakdown shows the pain of holding on too tightly to old beliefs, the fear of change when your entire identity is built on tradition. Through her, the movie explores what happens when faith turns into fear, when the need for control becomes stronger than the desire for love and understanding. And as she watches the world evolve around her, we see a woman who's just as lost as the novices she's trying to guide. In the end, Novitiate is about self-discovery, the hard, messy, and often painful process of figuring out who we really are. Cathleen's decision to leave the convent isn't a rejection of faith, but an embrace of honesty. She realizes that love and devotion shouldn't require her to erase herself, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from a life that no longer serves you. This movie leaves us with a sense of hope. Hope that Cathleen's journey toward love and acceptance is just beginning. It reminds us that faith doesn't always have to follow the rules, and that the most powerful kind of love is the one that allows us to be our true selves. Through its emotional storytelling and unforgettable characters, Novitiate becomes a quiet, powerful reflection on what it means to find your own path, even when that means letting go of everything you thought you wanted. That's our recap for today. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more sapphic content. What did you think about this movie? let us know in the comments below, and we will see you again here on Sapphic Nook.